tutorial before, but here's one just to show this quite, what I think is quite a nice 12-string guitar patch, which converts your 12-string, sorry, your 6-string to give it a 12-string sound. I'll just put that on in the background and leave it running just for a few seconds, just so you can hear what I mean. So yeah, as it as it runs in the background. Sorry for the slightly rough playing there. It was just the first couple of 12-string songs that came to mind. Obviously, you wouldn't be using this in the studio, but I think it's quite nice for for a live setup, particularly if you've got a set of covers to do and you can just switch this on. It I think probably will sound pretty good. So here we go with a tutorial of how I set this up. So we use MIDI, or I'm using MidiGuitar2, which I think is the only guitar MIDI input plugin for Loopy Pro. And I'm just going to show how I set that up. I've seen quite a few tutorials on this, but there are a couple of things which weren't obvious in the tutorials that I saw. First was that to make it work when you're triggering a third-party sound plugin, I'm using SampleTank in this case, you have to have the mix and the master controls set to 0, because MIDI guitar has its own built-in sounds, and otherwise you're going to hear those as well. And that wasn't actually clear on the tutorials I've seen. So how else do I set up on here? Noise gate's important. It turns out that in my, for my setup and the way SampleTank is responding to this, the noise gate off position works best. But for your own setup, this noise gate stops what does happen is if your guitar sustains, it continues to play repeated notes on occasion, like some sort of, random delay. So, set this to whichever suits your own setup. Tracking is polyphonic, that just works for me. I also have the bend set up. You've got a choice on here, disabled, and then these are the ranges. I use it basically one tone, 2 semitones, because that's going to happen with a guitar. Even if you're not intending to bend, it tends to vary a little bit. And if you don't set this, you will find that your notes on the MIDI plugin will just jump from one semitone to the next rather than making a smooth transition. So it responds better, so it sort of makes sense. So we're going back to the input bus here. What I'm doing here is also setting the crucial thing, setting the MIDI signal to 1 octave higher than the input. This is the basis of the whole setup. So let's move over to SampleTank, which you can use any, of course, but SampleTank works for me. And it's the basic SampleTank I've got here. I've not really paid for any additional stuff because really it's not necessary for my setup, and certainly not in this case. So what I've chosen here is one of the under guitar, one of the standard sounds, light crunch here, which works for me. I just left the settings pretty much as they were. That sort of works. Don't want to put too much delay on because it sort of interferes. You don't delay doesn't work for 12 strings again, for because of the mud that it creates. But yeah, set that to taste. If it do whatever works for you. Let's go back to Loopy Pro. What I've also done is take out. Listen, I did this very roughly. I'm sure that people will tell me that I've done this all wrong, but feel free to change it to suit your own setup. But I've just taken the higher frequencies down a little bit because, of course, 12-string guitars, for practical reasons, don't have high octaves on their two higher or highest strings because they just snap. I've also put on a couple of compressors. Listen, I'm not an expert on compression. I've done this because it sounds pretty good, and because I heard somewhere that the Byrds and the Beatles and all those classic 12-string players use loads of compression. Feel free to do whatever you want with that. These are matched on here. I've got this off. There's a noise gate on. Again, that just stops notes, should it be necessary, notes ringing out from the MIDI plugin. If you get any sustain or any, you catch any sounds, you don't want it. It'll trigger off a note rather than sounding like a little, scratch or whatever. You don't want that happening. However, it wasn't necessary to switch it on for this setup. So that's the high octave part of the 12-string taken care of. And then what I've done on here, I've got a separate input, which is just an analog guitar input. I've used Tonex. Again, use whichever suits you. On here, I've just chosen the first clean setting. Got to be clean because of you muddy up things. There are too many overtones already. So clean as you like, and that's all I put in. Just clean as a search under Tonex, and then you do whatever suits. And then I've used the same compression again. I've used an equalizer. I just use these sometimes just to to set my levels, because it just gives me a bit, but again, I might be doing this all wrong, but it works for me. And then finally, to get a bit of stereo spread, which is always nice on a 12-string sound, just separate things out a little bit on here. And then the standard MIDI guitar setup, I won't do a tutorial on that right now, but you need a setup, you need an input for MIDI guitar as well, I believe. Someone might correct me on that. Anyway, that's how I've got it set up. Anyway, I'll finish by putting the same little demo on again, and as I fade out here. And I hope this has been useful, and no doubt I've made loads of errors, and I've done things which the real experts among you can point out in comments, etc. But it works for me. Thanks very much.